Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. Almost to the end of our Big Ten previews with number three. And Rod's number three pick are the Michigan Wolverines. Before we get into it, be sure to drop a 5-star review into your podcast player, and a written part is also even better to help the algorithms lead other Spartan fans to the show and negate the hate that we'll get from U of M fans with this episode, I'm sure. Okay, Rod, let's talk about Michigan. Last year, of course, the inaugural season for Dusty May as he left FAU to jump into the Big Ten. A number of options for jobs for him, as far as we could tell. I mean, I think it was kind of the world was his oyster last year. He decided to land in East Ann Arbor and had a roster rate of turnover pretty much on his own, almost completely. But they did really well. They were 27-10 overall, 14-6 in the Big Ten. Obviously, made it to the Sweet 16 where they lost to Auburn, who then eventually took out Michigan State in the Elite Eight the next game. They finished third in the Big Ten, and
5%.
were pretty good. They were a very good team. They were 43rd in defense or offense, which was mainly because they didn't shoot great 3 point, and they also were a turnover happy team. They're 324th in turnovers, and if you recall, there were 340 teams in D1. Um, and they were very good defensively, and that's probably why they did so well. They were 12th overall. They were very good defending the threes and the twos, although they weren't a good defensive rebounding team. And I guess we can talk about first about Dusty May, first year in Ann Arbor, sort of an introduction to the rivalry, of course. That was also part of it. It's have the image on
Yeah.
the screen of the whole shenanigans that happened at center court and the last game of the season
Yeah.
in East Lansing. Uh, and I guess you could say, it's interesting looking at Dusty May. I know we were talking about at the beginning of the season, before the season began, that he is a guy who probably had ties to Indiana. It certainly seemed to us like he'd end up in Indiana. And of course, he ended up with Darren DeVries, who was from West Virginia and previously Drake. And his decision, I mean, at least you look at the outcome last year and then certainly your projections going to this year, seemed like the right one. Like he seemed like he had the resources that Michigan did not have really under Juwan Howard. It was obviously a dumpster fire in Michigan
Or any time
or
previous.
any time previously. Yes, exactly. And Indiana and Ohio State were sort of the other jobs that were available. Iowa was really probably not in play,
No.
uh, and yet it looks like he kind of made the right move in the sense of his team assembled looks really good this year. Obviously, you have him number three. This is where they ended last year, and so in many ways he looks like made the right decision. I mean, the of course probably part of the equation was you're following Juwan Howard. You can't look bad coming in after Juwan Howard after that dumpster fire that was Michigan the last 2 years. So in many ways, maybe he made the right move.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. Right now, it certainly would appear that way. Although I think the job that really surprises me that he did not take that was available at the same time, they were in the same cycle and they were interested in him as when he took the Michigan job the year before last, was Louisville. I was surprised by that. And Louisville seems to be right back at it
Mm-hmm.
under Pat Kelsey, and that's not a surprise. That just to me as a basketball job, that's right up there near the top. But here's the thing. What was interesting and different about this offseason versus the first one Dusty May had is that Michigan all of a sudden has had an influx of NIL money,
Right.
um, via the wife of the lead guy, Larry Ellison at
Larry
Oracle.
Olson, yeah.
And that was something that came from so far out of the blue, no pun intended, that nobody could have predicted it. So it was not, there's no way that it was a reason for him to take that job originally. Might have been a reason why he didn't really seem to express any interest in his alma mater last season in that opening at Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
I think if Indiana had fired Mike Woodson when they should have the year before, I think Dusty May would be the coach at Indiana.
Right.
But after a year, I think who knows? I would imagine my position was don't rule it out because Indiana would be one of the few places that could conceivably come in and just knock even another high major program out of the box in
Right.
terms of what they were willing to get collected from alums, et cetera, in terms of coaching salary commitment, NIL commitment, et cetera. Obviously, the equation at Michigan, at least for the short term, changed.
Yeah.
And so I got to think that had something to do with it, or just maybe he had decided, you know what, I was going to make a call on a high major job to take. This is the one I chose. I'm sticking with it. Maybe that's it. I don't know. And I don't know whether Dusty May has, aspirations beyond Michigan in terms of the
Sure.
pros.
Right.
But for now, he's their head coach. And I think having withstood that last year, the fact that Indiana had an opening and was interested, and having withstood that, and then you know the at least the short term financial situation at Michigan, I think he's there for the foreseeable future. So I guess we
I agree.
start with that. Now, if we look at the season he had, believe me, I'd love to come on here and mock it,
Yeah.
but he achieved to the upside for sure of what I thought was possible in year one. I thought they had clearly made roster upgrades, which was, as you were saying, it was not hard to do that coming off the year
Yeah.
that they had. But I wasn't sure the pieces fit together very well. And I still don't think they fit together well. This is a team without a real point guard. That's a challenge. But you can look at Michigan two ways. You can say, well, they had a great season, and they did. Finishing second in the Big Ten, tied for second in the regular season. They won the child's birthday party sack race, which nobody outside of Ann Arbor cares about. I'm going to be interested to see if they made rings for the team for that.
For the
That
Big
would
Ten
be
tournament.
that would be fucking hilarious. And I wouldn't put it past them. Uh, and then they got to the Sweet 16. They got to the second round and had at least one tricky game in there. I thought, well, actually both, because I thought, I thought their first round game against San Diego, it was a really good team and a tough team to play against stylistically. I thought Michigan would have a problem, and they did, but they got past it. And then I thought they'd have a problem against Texas A&M, who was very physical, very dominant
Hmm.
on the boards, an area Michigan struggled in. And that was another one. Texas A&M was there, but Michigan ended up winning the game. So you got to give them credit for that before Auburn just kind of flat handled them in the
Yeah.
Sweet 16. But you got to give Michigan credit for getting there. They really did achieve, as I say, to the upside of what I would have thought was possible coming into the season with all of that. That said, this was a team that shot the ball incredibly well from two and were solid at the free throw line. They weren't as good from three, but they weren't a disaster. Yet they finished with the number 43 offense. Well, how is that possible? Well, it happens when you have one of the worst turnover ratios in America. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a year that would have been like bottom of the barrel for Tom Izzo's teams, which traditionally have not cared that much about turnover rate. So it
Right.
tells
Right.
you how bad Michigan was in that area, really bad. And then you put that together with their rebounding at both ends, offensively and defensively. And this is what it was. They were operating consistently at a scoring chance deficit. That is incredibly hard to win with if that's your dynamic. Those are your parameters. That's very, very difficult to win because you're just flat out getting fewer chances to score than the other guy. And it
Right.
was just, it was both areas, turnover differentials and rebounding differentials. If they had been even mediocre in those two areas, they might have been able to push Michigan State instead of finishing 3 games back. And they might have been a threat. They might have had a better seed. They might have been a threat, But who knows? Go further, go to the Elite Eight, maybe contend
Mm-hmm.
for a Final Four spot. The things they did, what they were a total feast or famine team. The things they did well, they did exceptionally well. The things they did poorly, they were awful. And that's what ended up. Now, the better stuff clearly outweighed the awful stuff, but it was a factor. The negatives were clearly a factor and put a cap on what that team could be. I go back to the turnovers. When you don't have a point guard, and as skilled as Danny Wolf, who we'll talk about in a second, was, you're running your offense through a 7 foot power forward. Unless it's like Draymond Green, which doesn't come around every decade,
Right.
uh, you're probably going to have some issues. And Michigan had major league issues because of that. It wasn't the sole reason their turnover rate was what it was, but it had a lot to do with it. That they didn't have anybody you trusted. Wolf was, again, I go back to the feast or famine thing. Wolf could make spectacular plays with the ball, and he could make awful plays. And they happened in about equal proportion to each other. So when that's your offense, that's going to be a limiter. And if you looked at them just kind of in a vacuum, the way that the thing that most people focus on most is the way you shoot, right? Because that's how you
Yep.
score. And when you looked at Michigan in that way, your reaction would be, "Oh, this is a pretty good team." And yet they were only, by Big Ten standards, they were only okay offensively because of the giveaways and the fact they couldn't get enough extra possessions on the offensive glass. So it was a it was a weird year, a successful one. Um, so that's important to give them their just due. It was a total success in totality.
Yeah. That
But
what
I
matters.
but I
Winning
do
results.
look at right. I do look at those issues, and it really is remarkable in a lot of ways that they won as often as they did. Because the other thing worth mentioning too is that defensively, they didn't create any turnovers, but they were really good against twos and threes.
Yeah.
The defensive rebounding let them down a little bit. They still checked out, graded out pretty well overall defensively, but they could have been even better if they'd been, just a shade better, just mediocre in defensive rebounding. So that all leads into this year. We mentioned the, you know, unlimited Amex card that Dusty had in the portal, and he's added some big names
Mm-hmm.
by portal standards, that is, and he's remade his roster, but it's not quite. It doesn't have quite the same feel as a year ago because he does have a core of guys back to rely on, and they've now got a year playing under him, so that all helps. The portal class is very highly regarded, as it should be. They
Mm-hmm.
also added a McDonald's All American freshman. So the general consensus out there, I think, is that Michigan is even better than they were last season. And by that, we mean top 10 nationally, a team capable of pushing for a Big Ten championship. All of those things are, according to the national consensus, in play. I think they'll be good to very good, but I'm not sure the top five preseason stuff is warranted just yet. So why do I say that? Well, just like last season, they're working in a lot of new faces. Now, last
Yeah.
year, and they're talented, but last year, it worked. Again, on balance, there were issues, but the positives outweighed the negatives. Uh, as we've seen around the country with teams that are portal heavy, there's no guarantee that year to year that happens. Do I believe that Dusty May has some kind of special insight that makes it a lock that his portal additions are all going to seamlessly fit in? Well, no, of course I don't believe that because I saw some of the guys he brought in last year didn't work out.
Yeah.
Trey Donaldson was a one and done. I think there were issues with Roddy Gale. There were some, obviously, we talked about Wolf had a really nice season, but there were some issues there. So it's not a lock that all that fits seamlessly. And that's why I think they're going to be, as I say, the floor is a good team, most likely. It's hard to see them being anything worse than that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's fair just yet. Like I would not mention them in the same breath with Purdue. Why do which I see some people trying to do. Why? Because Purdue's core that's back has done it at a really high level together for
Yeah.
years.
Right.
Michigan does not have that.
Yeah.
Michigan's got a collection of guys that have done some things in other places, and then some guys that have done some things at Michigan that are okay, but they're not great. They're not the level of Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman Wren, et cetera. So I think there's reason for a little bit of caution, at least until you see how the pieces fit. But if people want to say they're a potential title contender in the league, absolutely, that's fair. But not a lock. And that's why I've got them where I do instead of second or first.
Right. Well, and I feel like Michigan last year, and again, the only thing that matters is wins and losses. So it doesn't matter how you win, how you lose. That's all that anyone's going to care about in the ultimately in the end. But I felt like last year Michigan seemed a little bit like Wisconsin a few years previously, where they
That's
had
fair
won
too.
8 or 9 out of 2 point games, and
Yep.
you can look at it. We could say, well, they're clutch. They've got the players, and they're able to close out
Right.
games. Element of luck. There's probably all that sort of involved in there. But to the credit,
100%.
they did win those games. That's all that really matters. But like Trey Donaldson was a good example of just a guy who really struggled most of the year, and then the end of the season, he just became like a different player, and he was suddenly clutch, right? Just at the end when they needed him.
Yeah.
So is that the coach getting more out of players? Maybe. And so I think if it's like you said with Dusty May, if he does this 4 or 5 years in a row, well, then you're like, okay, this is an elite coach. He's able to put this together, but you've got to do it. This does feel a little bit like an Illinois portal hype train, a little bit, and for those with a memory that of a couple years will recall that Jawan Howard, the first year he came to Michigan, he also went to the Sweet 16, right? And they had
Elite Eight.
Elite Eight, yeah. They had a very successful season, and that was sort of the high point, right out the gate. I guess they won a Big Ten title at one point too, but
That same
um,
year. But yeah,
things can happen.
they can. And I don't want to go too far down that road because I do think, Juwan Howard had no business running a major college basketball program.
Yeah,
That
probably
that
so.
was proven out.
Yep.
That's not me that's reality, right? They
Hmm.
fired him. So, and they didn't want to fire him. So that tells you that they
Yeah.
felt they had to. Dusty May's been to a Final Four. He's
Right.
run
Right.
college basketball programs at different levels. He had success doing it. To me, it last year did not look fluky in the sense that I believed that there were competent coaches running that team. I think stylistically, it's going to be interesting to see what they do going forward and whether the way that they played last year is an indication of what's to come. For example, and we're going to get into this, it looks to me once again that maybe they want to run a lot of their offense through their four man.
Hmm.
I don't know about that. This guy may be better at it or less mistake prone than Danny Wolf was, but I don't know that that's an approach I would lean on, but they may feel differently. Regardless, even with those stylistic things, this guy is not a 1 year fluky wonder and it's all going to
Right.
come crashing back to earth. I don't believe that. I don't know yet, and nobody can know what he is going to be in terms of is he a good coach? Is he a great one? Are they, where does it settle in? He's been to a Final Four. That's true. Give him credit for that. You also accurately have to understand it was fluky.
Yeah. It
It was a
was a weird
weird
year.
year.
Yeah.
It was kind of a weird way that that the that region in particular fell
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
him. He could have easily been facing Michigan State in an Elite Eight game, and wasn't because Kansas State, pulled it out. And
Yeah.
he had some other good fortune. That does, again, good fortune's part of it. I don't mean denigrate that accomplishment completely. A Final Four, very tough thing to reach. He's already got one in the bank before he got to Michigan. So I think he's going to do well there. Unfortunately, we'd all like to see Michigan in perpetual misery. I don't think they're going to be awful ever, but or very often at least. But where does he check in? The other thing I want to see, and he had a bigger high school class this year. So when he got that job, the way he talked suggested to me that, okay, the portal heavy stuff was basically because he got hired in that spot on the timeline, didn't
Right,
really have a
right.
choice, but that he wants to build his program with continuity and I still think that's true, but it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves over the next 2, 3 years. Does he stick to that? Um, does he emphasize development within his program, or is it a year to year fix as you invoked Underwood? Is that kind of more the approach where he's just plugging holes every year, and not really looking internally to solve those problems? That'll be something that's worth watching because I do think if it's the portal heavy approach, as we've been talking about, that to me is subject to inconsistency in a way that development programs, the few that there are that are left, don't suffer from,
Yeah.
you know? One other note before we go into the guys that they lost and the rest of it. And this is something apart from everything else that Dusty May is going to have to get a handle on. And you probably know what's coming. Um, he didn't understand the Michigan State
He still
rivalry
doesn't,
at
does
all.
he? I don't
I,
think.
there are no indications as of yet. We're going to see how he handles it going into next year. Now, I say that does not mean that I believe Dusty May has to be red faced for 40 minutes and pumping his fist. He's not Tom Izzo. He's never
No.
going to be Tom Izzo. And by the way, it's been proven you don't have to be Tom Izzo to handle that rivalry well. I think, John Beeline was on the short end of the stick for his tenure in that rivalry, clearly, but he had some moments and he couldn't be more of a different guy in terms of how he approached it than Tom Izzo, but he was still able to strike the right chord. There's
Yeah.
no doubt to me that for as calm on the surface and as he appeared, John Beeline eventually got enough of what that rivalry means to be able to get his teams at the level they needed to be to compete and win on occasion. If you look at the games that Michigan won in that period, don't try to, it was obvious those guys got it,
Hmm.
to the level that they needed to. The intensity they brought to it, how hard they played. It's not a normal game. It's just not. And if you don't understand that, at some level and figure out your own way to handle that. And again, it doesn't have to be the same way Tom Izzo does it, but you got to have an approach. Michigan did not have an approach in those two games. And that's why they got their doors blown off twice.
Yeah. Right.
Twice. Flat handled, not even close. And that should be embarrassing. And then to have, we could talk about the end of the game at Breslin and that whole, not just the incident itself, but the way he handled it in the couple of days that followed didn't look good. And I'm not saying didn't look good from the perspective of I'm a Michigan State fan and I'm outraged by the things this guy is saying. I mean, I found it dumb and irritating. It was dumb, but it was a dumb way to handle it. It again suggested guy does not understand, and he needs to. He needs to understand that he needs to understand. If he doesn't, he's gonna take it on the chin over and over and over. If he thinks that's another game and you just roll out there and you play it like it's Northwestern on a Wednesday night in Evanston, you're going to get your ass handed to you over and over and over, just like all your other coaches have before you. That's the truth, you know? So for them and for him, he's got to understand that is a game that requires a different level. And that not least of which is the reason that typically if you're playing Michigan State, you're playing one of, if not the best team in the conference. Let's not forget that.
Yeah,
So just
right.
from that vantage point, take the rivalry stuff out of it. You're playing an elite opponent usually. And then on top of that, there's all the extra emotion. The way Michigan State treats, handles, prepares for that game demands it of you. I'll guarantee you, if you talk to John Beeline, he would tell you that he had to learn that. He had to figure it out, and it took him a few years. It took him about 4 years till he had a team that could win a game in that rivalry, if I remember correctly. Um, and and that's what's required. So Dusty May, I'm not saying he can't or won't, but I'm saying he needs to get it. He needs to understand it. For their purposes, it would be good if that process started now. I don't
Yeah.
know whether it will or not. That's an open question. I hope it doesn't. I hope he continues treating it the way he did, because if he does, he's going to end up with L after L after L after L, just like John Beeline did for a long time, just like Tommy Amaker did, just like Brian Ellerby did, and just like every other dope they've had in that job would have if they were facing Tom Izzo.
It's
That's
interesting because
reality.
when we talked to Mike Garland, he said early years of Izzo, he didn't have a handle that rivalry either. In the opposite direction, he was like too
Yep,
focused on it. It was
that's it.
too big a thing, and so you have to find a balance where it's important. Obviously, big game, and you have to extra focus, but you don't want to like stake everything on that game too. So
Well,
there's a point there, and I think with May, at least from the outside, both of us looking in, it certainly felt like it was just another game, and I think he learned it wasn't. And I don't know. I mean, it's probably hard to find that right balance where you don't take the game, you don't put too much in the game, but you also have more than the average. The attention to detail and those sorts of things, and the intensity is just different.
Izzo was facing a different kind of challenge though, because it was twofold. One, Michigan was considered the better program at
Yeah,
that time,
right.
right? They had a lot of glamour associated with them uh, because of the recruiting, which of course, there was aided by illegality over and over and over for decades. Um, but that was part of it. He not only felt, and I'm speaking for him, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the ballpark, is that not only was he dealing, again, like I just said about Michigan State, hey, if you're Michigan, you're dealing with an elite opponent. Take the rivalry out of it. Well, that was the case for Izzo in those days. He was dealing with teams that were stocked with McDonald's All Americans that he had to overcome. So that alone is a challenge, right? But then
Yeah,
on top of that, there was the fact that he understood they had cheated their way to getting there for decades.
yeah,
And it starts to become this, you're facing the evil empire kind of
yeah.
thing.
The injustice, yeah, et
And I
cetera.
think
Yeah.
that, right, and a sense of justice, and they screwed Judd's career over from what it should have been. Great as it was, it should have been even better.
Hmm.
But for what they pulled, because they would have gotten a number of those guys. Otherwise, I believe that. I can't prove it, but I believe it. Um, it's it starts to become this all-encompassing thing, and you do have to find the proper perspective. And it took a little bit of time. It took a couple of years for him to get there. I would argue that the bigger problem is the first couple of years he didn't have enough talent. Once he had
Yes,
enough talent,
exactly.
they started winning. But I
Yeah,
think that was the bigger thing. But I'm sure that the approach needed to change as well. But he's found that balance where they take that game extremely seriously. Even when they've lost, you never questioned. At least I can't remember a game where I looked at it and I questioned it and I said, they just look flat. They just don't look like they're treating this thing with the seriousness it needs to be treated.
yeah,
And I've sat through a couple that were not pleasant, but I never felt that way. I just felt, well, we weren't good enough, we didn't execute well enough, the normal things, you know. But Michigan, and again, it's hard. You got a guy coming in from out of state, so I'll give him this. I guess I believe him when he said things like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm not up to date on Michigan State's traditions." All right, fine. I'll buy that. You're a guy from Indiana. You've been out of the Midwest for most of your professional career after that. You might not know anything about Michigan State senior day traditions. That's fine. We'll give you that one. You do now, though, don't you? You do now.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's another thing in addition to the more important macro level stuff. How does this guy evolve? We begin to find out this year what he learns, what he's stubborn about. If he is insistent that, hey, we're Michigan and we don't, every game's the same. Okay, great. See you with a couple L's because that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. I'm convinced of that. Over the long run, you might get a game here or there, but it's that approach is not going to work. You have to find a way. If it's not in your personality to be a red ass, which I don't think it is, then you got to find a way like Beeline did to approach it that deals with the seriousness, but um, you find your own approach that works. And I don't think that can be just complete, hey, it's another Tuesday.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. It's got to be something else, you know. And I would also say this, then we can move on. Um, the thing about John Beeline when he would talk about like Izzo's told the story several times about Beeline saying to him one day, like, we don't have to hate each other. He didn't mean individually. He meant the programs and what he was saying, I think, was we can turn the temperature down on this. It doesn't have to be a blood feud. And Izzo's response was, no, it has to be. It's a rivalry. That's what it's
Yeah.
about.
Right.
Um, but the thing is, I think John Beeline was being very honest in that. And you never saw during his whole period there, you never saw, I mean, we all disliked certain players, Moritz Wagner was a scumbag, not
Okay. Right.
literally, but the way
Yeah.
Michigan
Yeah.
State fans felt about him.
Yeah.
We didn't like his faces and there have been some guys over Beeline's tenure that you felt that way about that were just pricks. But you never thought it came from the top, and they never engaged in stupid stuff. There was no dumb stuff that went on really during
Right.
during his period. There was dumb stuff at Breslin last year.
Yeah.
Really dumb. Really dumb. Like that's going to be for better or for worse, and it might not make a damn bit of difference. But emotionally, you don't think that's going to have an impact on Michigan State when they suit up against Michigan for the first time next year? That they're going to carry some of that into that game with them? You're out of your mind. Of course they
Yeah.
will.
You'll see those t-shirts.
Why give them that?
Yeah.
If you're
Right.
Michigan, why
Exactly.
give Michigan State any kind of edge? Your whole thing is if you believe, hey, we need to modulate our approach, not make it too big. Keep it as sane and normal as possible. Well, then your team needs to behave differently. And they didn't do that. And the fact that it wasn't even what makes it all worse is it wasn't even well, they're up big and they're rubbing it in on us, and now we're going to come back with a fury because we were humiliated. No, they got their asses handed to them and did that. They
Yeah.
lost both ways, big. So that's the stuff I want to see from Dusty May in this rivalry. Can he get an approach and can he get a handle on it and how his team needs to function in order to best navigate it? Because it's the one thing that I would say in his first year was an abject failure. Everything else, the season in totality, hey, A minus probably is a fair grade, something like that. Um, but that was a failure. And that can't be a failure for them. It can't be. It's too important.
Well, one thing that'll never be a failure is if you go to Nudge Printing and order some stuff there, some Spartan apparel, you will be instantly happy. Also, any person you buy it for will be very happy for you and be very excited that you did it. Head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. A huge assortment of Spartan apparel. Also, other schools in the state of Michigan, outside of the University of Michigan, of course. Also, some other Big Ten schools like Indiana and Minnesota and Iowa, if you want. You can get great deals on that. 20% off as a listener to the show. Just type in Final Four as one word at checkout. Nudge Printing is our longest sponsor. They also host all our games. And so our contest, the Beat Rod contest, which we're getting close to the end here. Rod has Michigan as third. If you think you've got a better idea who's going to end up 1 through 18 in the Big Ten, send over your entries for free to me, Eric at tffinots.com. Just send the order you think the teams will finish at, and we use the tiebreakers used at the Big Ten tournament. So 1 through 18, and then have the amount of points you think Michigan State will score against Michigan as a tiebreaker. Make sure you send in the tiebreaker. Otherwise, I will contact you and ask you because it actually came in play last year. So the winners, of course, win gift cards to Nudge Printing. So you get some great Spartan stuff, both as the winner or the runner-up. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. Head on over to Nudge Printing. All right, so let's talk about the players now with Michigan, especially those who are departing, key departures, and retention of players. We'll begin, of course, with Danny Wolf, who ended up 27th pick in the first round. Not too in the NBA, not too bad considering he was at Yale the previous season. He was definitely they thought saw a lot of potential him coming to Michigan. I think he exceeded most people's expectations. Probably 7-footer. He was a point forward. He played four. He averaged a little over 13 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game, 1.4 blocks a game, 3.5 assists per game, but of course 3.5 turnovers a game. So he was kind of like a Yakachonis at Illinois, that he was a guy who was mistake prone, but he would make some really great plays too. So he kind of gave you everything. He shot 50, 34, and 59. Really struggled at the free throw line, which is strange for a guy who could shoot so well. He
Yeah.
really, really
Yeah.
had. I mean, it's obviously a mental thing. At some point in the season, it just becomes a thing in your head. And that was, I mean, he shot probably worse than I did when I was doing free throws at the Breslin during my free throw competition. So that's pretty bad. So anyway, but Danny Wolf, by all accounts, a great season for him. Even though you could point to a couple negatives, I suppose, in his game.
Big ones. But the positive, again, it was like I said about Michigan in general. The
Yeah.
positives outweighed the negatives, but the negatives put a serious cap. Imagine if Danny Wolf had shot 70% at the line, which, as you were alluding to, if you look, it's kind of backwards from the way it normally goes. Normally, you see a guy shoot free throws well who's struggling from three, and you say,
Right.
okay, that's an indicator that given some time, the three is likely going to improve. In his case, he shot threes decently. I mean, 34% is not gangbusters, but it's solid. You would have expected a guy capable of doing that could hit like 70% at the line. Would be a
Yeah.
stretch. He didn't come close. So I think you're right. I think it had to be some kind of psychological, mental thing going on because the mechanics of his shot do not suggest a guy that would shoot that poorly. But yet he did. And he got there a fair amount. That was the negative because he was active. The turnovers obviously were a huge problem. Huge.
Yeah.
When you're putting the ball in a guy's hands that much and saying, go make decisions for us, go make plays. And they would do it at times. There were some late game situations. You mentioned they won a lot of close games. That's true. They also lost some, and some
Yeah.
of it was that. I felt that at winning time, Michigan was in trouble because Wolf had to be the guy, and he was at best a coin flip as to what kind of decision he was going to make. But when you back out of that and you look at the totality of it again, this is a guy who, as you said, the year prior was at Yale. He's in the Ivy League. He goes from that to all Big Ten and a first round draft pick. It's pretty hard to knock that. I think Michigan fans were optimistic about him coming into last season. I don't think anybody called the kind of year he was going to have, though. I think that would have been at the high end of expectations. So credit to
Yeah.
him, credit to Michigan for identifying it. the kid grew up a Michigan fan, even though I think he's from suburban Chicago, but he grew up a Michigan fan. So I don't think it was a tough recruitment for them in the portal.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um, but he, for the most part, you would say that was a great success. I can't say an unmitigated one because there were some issues. And frankly, I'm not sold on him as an NBA player. I think NBA teams have to love the fact that a 7-footer has some of the ball skills that he has.
for sure. And
That part's
shooting.
true. But the turnovers are an issue. You wonder about strength. He held up pretty well in the Big Ten last year, but the NBA is a different beast. But then for me, the biggest thing is he was able to get by defensively, and I don't mean the shot blocking, I mean out on the floor. He was able to get by at Michigan last year. I don't know if that's going to be the case in the NBA. I would
Right.
worry about athleticism in that respect. But as a college player, hey, and overall, you got to say great year.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, you kind of he feels a little bit. Luca Garza is a bad example, except it just the fact that his ability to move is you can get by in college, but you get to the next level and it can become a problem. I
The
felt like
advantage he's got over Garza is Garza was pretty much locked in. He was going to have to be a 5 man. There was no
yeah,
question.
yeah. Oh, yeah. In that sense, there's not much. There's the
Yeah.
similarity is only I think just in the movement ability.
Yes.
And but I feel like Wolf is very much like Tanjay in the sense that you had two guys who really they were transfers and they came in they just blew up, and it gives people an outsized view of what transfers can do. I mean, obviously transfers can be great additions to team, but they're just as many busts as there are booms, and
Yeah.
we certainly saw that Kansas State, right? We saw where they assembled the perfect team that beat Michigan State, got to the Elite Eight until they lost to Dusty May at FAU, but then they've done nothing since. I mean, so living by the portal, it's sort of like with Kenneth Walker, right? You might get your Kenneth Walker, but you're more likely to get just like average players or players who had some sort of problem. Not
Or
always.
or we look at, as we've talked about, we look at a program like Illinois where
Yeah,
it's, there's a floor, there's a fairly high floor. You're probably going to be good enough to make the tournament, but are you just in the tournament or are you really in the tournament? And
yeah,
that
right.
there's a wide variance. As you said, Kansas State is an example that's even more volatile.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
are you
they haven't been good really since that one
right, and
time.
it does,
Yeah.
and God knows, they spent money. They went out, they
Hmm.
got Coleman Hawkins from Illinois, and that was a total
Yep.
flame out. You just you never know, and that's why I'm saying I just put at least some level of caution with hype around this Michigan team because so much of it is based again around the guys that they've added. We've
Yeah.
seen some of these guys play a lot. I know that, as we're going to talk about, Morris Johnson is potentially a very good player. We know that a kid like Mara can contribute to a winning team if you use them properly. We know this, but how all those pieces are going to fit, we don't know that. It worked for Michigan last year. We'll see if it works again.
Yeah. And it's definitely a struggle, I think, playing different ways all the time, because I think there's certainly a culture aspect of, toughness or whatever it might be, rebounding the sort of style of play, but to stylistically change every year, not to say you can't do it. We've seen Brad Underwood evolve and be successful on some level multiple years, but it's just hard to do. I mean, it doesn't mean it can't, again, it doesn't mean it can't be done. And
It
we'll see,
is,
maybe
and
Michigan will feel the
that's what
same.
yeah, that's why I'm going to be interested to see how much Michigan changes this year.
Right. Well, another key departure, another big man, another 7-footer, Vlad Golden. He's the other. What do they call those guys? I can't remember now. It's already been like 6 months. Area 51. That's right, because one was yeah right. Uh, he was a player who followed Dusty May from FAU. Averaged 16.6 points a game, 7 rebounds a game, 1.5 blocks a game. Shot 61, 33, and 71. He was a good player, and he's someone that obviously Michigan will miss and have there's a lot of production there on both ends that they need to replace.
He was not as surprising as Wolf because
Yeah,
I think he had been a key part of that Final Four team and then had an even better season the next year at FAU. So it was kind of anticipated, well, Golden's going to be some version of good, and he was. He was very good. He was actually their leading scorer. He's their second leading rebounder. Provided good interior defense. There's a lot to like about him. I thought he played within himself very well. You didn't often see him trying to do things that he wasn't really capable of doing, which is a hard thing for college players sometimes to get their arms around. I thought he was pretty close to being the best version of what he could be. He didn't rebound quite as well as I needed him to at times. You look at him and you think that should be a dominant rebounder, and he really wasn't. He was good, he wasn't great. And again,
Yeah.
this team suffered. They were not a good rebounding team at either end. But overall, he was one of the best bigs in the conference. And, all that Area 51 stuff was typical dumb Michigan shit as they are wont to engage in. But um, it was a unique and effective combination a lot of the time. And it did present issues for opponents that you're just not used to facing. You're not used to having to worry about a 4 or 5 pick and roll combination. That just
Right.
doesn't, you don't see that very much. And so, just in terms of the kind of spots that put opposing defenses in, it was stuff those guys are not used to doing. And so that did prove to be effective for them. And again, I'm anxious to see, do they go back to that well with different players?
Well, then you have Trey Donaldson, 6'2", Auburn transfer. Had a good season by the numbers. He averaged 11.3 points a game, shot 43, 38, and 69. Led the team in assists with 4.1 assists a game, just 2.5 or 2.2 turnovers a game. And as I mentioned, down the stretch, he was really clutch. I mean, he was a guy who was making shots, winning games. I think Big Ten tournaments where he won a couple games that way.
Yeah.
Um,
He ran the sack race well.
yeah, right, he did.
He
But I
did
feel
play
like the
well in the
last
NCAA tournament.
he did not.
He had
I
some,
think the last 7 or 8 games of the regular season, he was really good, and then the Big Ten tournament, and that was sort of like his peak, and then he sort of
no,
faded
I
away.
actually think it was the other way. I think he was not playing well down the stretch in the regular season.
I feel like he
And
won
then
some games. Did he not? Maybe he
then
didn't.
he
I'm
then he
just misremembering.
rebounded.
Maybe it
Then
was
he
just the Big Ten
rebounded.
tournament. Yeah,
His season was something of a roller coaster because he started off very well, then he hit a rough patch,
yeah,
and then I maybe the Roddy Gale is the guy who really bounced back
yeah, for
late.
sure.
Um, but yeah, the numbers look good. But if you watched Michigan, I keep saying they didn't have a point guard. Well, Donaldson averaged 4 assists per game. That's not terrible. Yeah, but if you watched them, you understand those numbers flatter to deceive. They really do. Because when they were looking to a guy to actually create, it was Wolf. Donaldson didn't do that. You put Donaldson up against a guy like Jeremy Fears, and there's a marked difference.
Yeah,
Jeremy Fears is a guy who actually is a point guard by mentality and by skill set. That's what he does. He creates for other people. He makes other people better. Trey Donaldson got assists where he was swinging the ball to a shooter.
right. It
And
was like
that's,
an Iowa assist.
that all count, right. It counts, but this is why the numbers alone aren't going to tell you everything you need to know. You need to actually watch. And if you did, you understood, well, Trey Donaldson is not a guy who is going to make teammates better. He's a shooter, he's a capable jump shooter, and that gives him value. I'm not saying he's not a player that can have value for you. He just isn't that kind of guy. He's not a floor leader.
Yeah,
And he transferred to Miami. And
interesting choice.
well, they're rebuilding. They have Jai Lucas now
Yeah,
running the program, and they've got Malik Renault from Indiana went there as well. They'll have some talent. It'll be interesting to see how that program goes because Lucas is a guy that gets credited as being a great recruiter. We'll see. But uh, the other interesting thing, and this is going to be a contrast between this year's Michigan team and last year's. One positive for Trey Donaldson is, yeah, he wasn't a creator or really an initiator, but what he was effective at is being a spot up shooter who could play off of the guy who was the initiator, which mostly was Wolf. So they were
right.
fortunate that, yeah, he's not a real point guard, but he is a shooter. And so kickouts were a very valuable component of Michigan's offense. The guy they're replacing him with is a very different kind of player, Elliot Cadeau, and I don't think has any chance of being the shooter that Donaldson was. So again, it's going to be, do they try to play the same way? Do they tweak some things? How does it all fit? Remains to be seen.
Well, one thing you need to make sure you take care of is as we get close to the winter. I hate even saying that, but make sure your windows are clean. Make sure your house is clean. Contact the Squeeze Squad of Grand Rapids. They'll take care of things. You don't need to go to the transfer portal to find a better team. They're right here in your backyard in Grand Rapids, the greater Grand Rapids area. You can contact them even if you're outside of Kent County. Get a hold of Troy and his team. You get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you contact them. You can do that at our support page at tffinots.com/support. Again, they'll take the inside, the outside, your windows. They will also power wash your house. Whatever needs to be done, they can take care of it. And whether it's a high rise, just a building, maybe a business, they can do any job. They've even been so successful. They've done taking care of the state capitol. So don't think that your house is too tall unless your house is bigger than the state capitol, in which case I'm shocked you're listening to the show. All right. So moving on to players that retained. We'll start with Roddy Gale. Sort of, he came from Ohio State, the rival, 6'4" senior wing. He averaged almost 10 points a game, shot 43, 23, and 79. I mean, the 23 is obviously the thing that was really, really people are focusing on. He seemed totally lost near the end of the season. And then, as you mentioned, he just kind of came on at the end. He sort of like figured things out. And, question, of course, defensively, he's very good. The question is he going to be that figured out next year or this season? I think that's a bigger question.
Roddy Gale's whole career at Ohio State and at Michigan. How effective he is really has turned around the jump shot.
Right.
What he
and
has
even on
had,
defensive end too, right? I mean, he feels like
well, he's good. That's what I mean. Like he's steady there, and that's why Dusty May kept playing him. Is he
right.
had experience and he was steady defensively. So there was value to him for Michigan in Dusty May's eyes, not necessarily the 14 people who care about Michigan basketball. I did notice some consternation about Roddy Gale getting the minutes he was at times
Right.
last year. And the reason is he wasn't hitting jump shots. So we know that's the simpleton fans only measurement is that Dusty May understood that Gale was still giving him a certain kind of value that he felt he needed on the floor. Much of that turned around what he did defensively. So he helps you there. But whether Roddy Gale is going to be a truly impactful player or a guy who is a very much just a role player because he can guard people, but he doesn't give you much else, it turns on that jump shot. And that he has ridden the roller coaster. His first year at Ohio State, not good. Second year, very good. Third year, not good. Last year at Michigan, not good. So now he enters, I'm sorry, it's 2 years at Ohio State.
Right.
It was good freshman year, not good sophomore year, then not good last year at
Yeah.
Michigan. But you get my point. He's
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of variance, and we're not talking about, oh, he shot 44%, then he dipped to 36. We're talking about 40%, 25%. We're talking about big gaps, big
Yeah.
swings. So did that little run at the end of the season uh, tell us that he's going to be much more of an upside guy this year? I don't think there's any relationship between the two. I think it's a whole new year. It's a whole new thing for him. And we'll see if he can find consistency over, 4 or 5 months as opposed to, 4 or 5 games.
Yeah. Well, then another player we're going to talk about is Namari Burnett. He's was an original transfer, I believe, from Alabama, who came over to join Jawan Howard. So he's been there quite a while. At this point, he and Shutter, I think, the only players who were on who's sticking around from the Howard era.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
he averaged 9.4 points a game, shot 48, 40, and 76. Most of his productions from outside the arc. So he was very good shooting, and I think he had definitely from his previous year at Michigan, definitely an upside last year for him.
There's no question. You know, he came in with a reputation of being a really good defensive player. He'd been that at Alabama. That
Yeah.
had kind of been his calling card, in fact. And then that first year at Michigan, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you'd have to say that was an entire collapse in every conceivable way from that Michigan team. So you can't really put it on him individually because I think
Right.
last season when he was playing on a coherent team again, you saw a bounce back there. I'm not saying he's a lockdown guy, but he was pretty good defensively, trustworthy. And then the shooting was great. He's another guy. I talked about Donaldson as a spot up guy. Burnett, even more so, is just a great weapon to have as somebody who can kind of live on the arc, receive kickouts, and bury open jumpers. And that is, he's not a guy who is going to, contribute 4 or 5 different ways for you. It's
Right.
pretty much, they use that cliche 3 and D.
Right.
That's Namari Burnett. That's pretty much all you get, but that's valuable if you've got
Oh
a guy
yeah,
who does it well enough, and he
for
did
sure.
last season, and that plus his experience, I think, makes it highly likely that he'll be a starter again. I expect he and Gale to be the starting Wayne to open the season. It makes sense, and that's a great place to start, for Dusty May with this team is to have guys like that, but particularly Burnett, who was so steady last year. And I think that's the difference. That's one difference between what he had last year and what he's got this year. Dusty May now has a core. He's got some guys that have done it for him.
Right.
And Burnett is one of the key guys that falls into that category.
Well, previously mentioned Will Cheddar, guy I've never believed in. 6'8" senior, averaged 6.4 points a game, 2.4 rebounds a game, played about 60 minutes last year, shot 48, 35, and 86. I think the shooting is down, that 3-point shooting. I think it was close to
It
40%
was.
before
It
with,
was,
lower
but
volume. Um, anyway, he just a guy who I don't know that he's a net positive for your team. He's just so bad defensively. I think you just don't get enough out of him. But I guess when he's hitting the threes, then he brings some value to your team.
yeah, I think Shedder is an example of a guy who is in the diminishing returns category, meaning
Right.
the
Hmm.
longer you play him, the more the weaknesses show up and get exploited, and you end up losing that net battle. You know, uh, if you've got him in a more limited role, you got a better chance maybe of getting a positive out of it because he could come in and hit a three or two, and you get him out of there before the other team can really exploit him defensively. It offensively, he's fine. His shooting was down a little bit, but he's still a capable shooter. I mean, he's a guy you have to guard out there. And he's actually gotten to be reasonably okay inside the arc. He's not a great low post player, but he could do some things in there. I think that gets offset by the fact that he's truly horrible defensively and as a rebounder for big. He just doesn't give you anything. And so that's a problem. The big positive for this team, though, for this roster is in my opinion, he's moved from where he was last year, which was really the only big man reserve. So he was the third post player. To
Right.
this year, he's fourth likely. That's a positive for Michigan because you're moving him down the pecking order. His minutes will be a little more limited. You got a better chance of maybe not losing out on that diminishing returns thing.
And next we have LJ Kason, who is one of the famous players who was at center court after the senior day. Uh, he's a highly rated recruit. He came from FAU, 6'2" guard, averaged 4.3 points a game, shot, what I think that's 43,
Yeah,
25,
that's right.
and 82. So he's potentially a point guard. Didn't do a whole lot last year, obviously, but maybe he's got more in him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch his development. He was not a highly rated recruit. He committed to FAU, followed the staff to Michigan, which told you something
Right.
that they brought him along. They thought he could actually make a difference. And then he was really good in their exhibitions. And of course, then the dipshit Michigan hype train took over. And it's, oh, he's going to be the answer to our problems at guard. Well, he clearly was not. He struggled much of the year, just could not shoot. Um, didn't show. They talked about him as a point guard, and I didn't see it. I just did not see the instincts for it. Maybe that changes over time. It is possible if you really know what you're doing that you can build a point guard. You can manufacture one. The guy who used to be great at that was Judd Heathcote. You know, if people remember what Eric Snow was like when he was a freshman, and I don't just mean the shooting, I mean all of it. He was a guy who had played essentially power forward in high school, and they were making him into a point guard. And it took probably 2 whole years and into a third year before it really started to take root. And then he ends up having a long NBA career as a point guard and as a good one.
Yeah.
Mark Montgomery was kind of that way. He wasn't a pure point guard. They over time they made him into one. So you probably don't construct truly elite guys at that position. I think some of it has to be innate, but you can get guys better. So maybe Dusty May is one of those guys. We don't know. But there's work to be done with LJ Cason as a point guard. That's my point. Uh he did have some good games late. He shot the ball better in the postseason. So that's another thing that I'm sure Michigan is leaning on, Michigan fans,
Hmm.
that, well, we got something coming. But, you know, it's funny. I looked at his numbers and remember when Michigan State got Divine Ugochukwu in the portal, there was a lot of focus on, oh my God, these shooting numbers are horrible. What kind of year do you? Well,
Right.
let me tell you something. The performance between he and Kason, very similar, except I think Ugochukwu was better defensively. And, you know, he's supposedly this raw piece of clay where Michigan fans talk about Kason as if he's a star in the making. I don't buy it. I think he could be a good player. I'm going to be interested, obviously, to see the development from year one to year two. Typically, that's where it happens.
Hmm.
Is if a guy's going to really make it, you start to see it in that second year. His role is going to be interesting too. I don't see him as a starter, but I think he probably will be in line to be used a fair amount off the bench. How big, what they're asking of him, and what is he able to actually do all remain open questions. There's some physical talent there. I could see that, but I don't see an automatic success story with LJ Kason. We'll see what happens this year.
And finally, for retained players, we'll mention Oscar Goodman. He's a 6'8" forward. He's from New Zealand. Long flight. He made it through halfway through the season. He was redshirted. So he's maybe a stretch four candidate.
Yeah, and you know, they talk about him as if, you know, he has that ability and they think he could be a good player. We haven't seen anything yet. He redshirted, as you say, he joined the team, but he didn't halfway through the season, but he didn't play. But he got practice in, so I'm sure that's been helpful for him. But given this roster, I think it's an uphill battle for him to see consistent minutes this year. But again, that remains to be seen. If the shooting is real, he can come in and he can hit effective shots. I mean, does he rebound and defend better than someone like Shutter? Might he be able to leapfrog a senior or fifth year guy? Tall order, but I guess not impossible. We'll have to see.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about newcomers to the Wolverines. We'll begin with the most obvious one, Yaxel Lendenborg, whom will definitely challenge for best name in the Big Ten. 6'9", 230-pound grad transfer from UAB. He was definitely one of the big portal ads. There was a question whether he'd even end up in Ann Arbor because there's a possibility that he'd go to the NBA draft. He was given, I guess, notice that he probably wasn't going to be a high first round pick. And so he decided to play another year of college, which we're going to see a lot more players do at this point. He averaged 17.7 points a game at UAB, 11.4 rebounds a game, shot 52, 36, and 76. And very intriguing, of course, very similar, as Kenji alluded to, with a Danny Wolf. He averaged 4.2 assists to 2.2 turnovers a game. So, and also, also by the way, 7'4" wingspan with where he averaged almost 2 blocks a game.
Yeah, the similarities. to Wolf are pretty astounding. He's not as
Yeah.
big, but it really is. You almost could not have drawn up a better replacement for Wolf in terms of just the totality of things that Lendenborg can do. With the draft, what it came down to, my understanding is that he wanted a first round guarantee, and he didn't get that, and so made the decision to come back. And you're right, you will see that more often because guys like him, for example, he not only has another year to maybe polish up his NBA resume and move up the draft board, but he's going to be paid extremely well while doing that.
Right.
So that's all a big plus, and Michigan benefits from it. There's a chance that he's an upgrade from Wolf, and I mean that primarily in this sense. There's a reasonable chance, I don't think it's a lock, but a reasonable chance that he can more or less do everything else to the level that Wolf did, but hold down the turnovers.
Right.
His performance at UAB would suggest that's possible. Uh, I would say the Big Ten is a different animal, and then I think they're in Conference USA.
Yeah. Of course, not the
Um,
Ivy League, so a little better league than the Ivy
yeah,
League.
that's true, but a lot of talent here.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a guy who he shot well, so he's like Wolf. He's a guy you got to guard on the arc. He could also score inside. The 7'4" wingspan is crazy for a 6'9" guy. I mean, that's a +7. That's a
I would
big
not want to try and
gap.
find shirts if I had a guy.
Um, and so he's going to give you that rim protection that you got from Wolf. Um, just a lot to like here, obviously. But I think the main knock on him is there's a lack of lateral quickness. And that was also an issue for Wolf. So Michigan was able to kind of hide that and get by. Can they
Hmm.
do so again? One interesting thing that I've heard, and this is if they do this, I I can't imagine it's going to work. We'll see, but I just really struggle with it. There has been talk that they may go with a three big front line a lot, which means Lendenborg would be your three man.
What?
I have questions
Oh,
about
Johnson is a four.
Lendenborg.
Is a four. Okay.
Right. I have questions about Lendenborg guarding fours, certain types of fours.
Yeah.
At the three, I look, I struggled with the idea of playing Wolf and Golden together, and that worked out on balance pretty well.
Hmm.
This seems another step down a crazy road. We'll see. I think, regardless, I think as long as they don't put Lendenborg in that kind of position with a lot of frequency, I think there's a chance they can figure it out defensively so he doesn't get exploited too much out on the floor. But there's a lot to like here. There's no doubt about that. Again, though, new player, new team, new teammates, new system, blah, blah, blah. Got
Yeah.
to see how it fits. But he was one of the hotter names in the portal for a reason.
Yep. Yeah, he was probably about as hot as Donovan Dent was, who ended up at UCLA. I mean, I think
Yep.
just different positions, but I think they were
Yep.
probably pretty
Very
equivalent
comparable.
in
Very
that sense.
comparable.
Another name that was not really in the portal very long, but it's more as Johnson, 6'9", 240-pound sophomore transfer from Illinois, which we thought was a pretty big loss for the Illini. And he brings something that the Michigan did not have last year, which is namely rebounding. He averaged 7 points a game, but only played 18 minutes. But in that time, averaged almost 7 rebounds a game. Shot 64% from the floor, 62% from the line. Also had about a block a game, and was just a guy who was very physical, very tough, and someone who kind of does all the dirty work that you need.
Potentially, he's a really important player
Right.
for Michigan. I think he can be a big part of changing the dynamic for them on the boards and helping them improve because he is a natural rebounder, both ends, particularly on the offensive end. I think he can be a wrecking ball.
Yeah.
Um, I thought he was really, really impressive as a freshman when he was healthy for Illinois. It was kind of a shocker to me that they lost him. Great ad for Michigan. I mean, I won't lie, he's the kind of guy I would have welcomed at Michigan State.
Sure.
He's a Tom Izzo kind of player. Not yet a guy you look at as a major league offensive contributor, but I could see that potentially coming in terms of a low post game. We're going to have to wait and see how it evolves. Right now, at least based on his freshman year, he was mostly a second chance and
Mm-hmm.
you know around the rib kind of guy,
Yeah.
not
Put
much
that guy.
else.
Yeah.
But he's got a chance, I think. It won't surprise me if he could develop a decent running hook, that kind of thing, that he could be a much better player offensively over time. I think he should be the starting five man. I think he helps you defensively, he helps you on the boards, and he'll give you a little something offensively in the ways he's capable of contributing in. But we'll see how Michigan utilizes him. But I like him a lot.
Yeah. And the likely starting five man, or certainly other person in contention, is Adai Mara, 7'3", 250-pound junior transfer from UCLA. He averaged 6.4 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, along with a little over 1.5 blocks a game. Just played 13 minutes, so those are pretty good production at that time. Shot 59% from the floor for obvious reasons, but only 58% from the line. He had a point during the season where he looked like he was really emerging at UCLA, and then he just sort of faded away again. He was after I think he was like 3 or 4 blocks a game. It was kind of crazy what he was doing for a
Yes.
couple of their games. And then he just kind of fell out of the playing rotation because I don't even think he played a ton when we watched him in
He
person
didn't.
in
He
LA.
didn't. He played, but not, and that was right on the heels of that
Right, because we
great
thought he was
run
going to
that
be more
he
impactful.
had
Yeah, yeah,
made.
right.
Um, I think my guess would be Mick Cronin looked at that game and said, "Not a game for Mara because he's not up to the physicality." That would be my
Yeah,
guess. Look, there's a ton of potential here. There's no doubt. All you've got to do is watch some of the tape from that run we're talking about, and you see it. You kind of a C plus version of Zach Edey, which is pretty good. Uh, I think there's still big questions though.
hmm
I think if he's in a reserve role, if you're playing him 15 minutes a night, that kind of thing, I have no doubt he can be effective. But when you start expanding from there, I think the question is, does he have the strength? I mean, 250 sounds big, and it is, but on a 7'3" frame,
yeah,
you still saw strength issues showing up last year at UCLA. And I think until you see otherwise, that's still a fair question. I also think conditioning is a fair question. We were talking about Zach Edey not long ago, and that was my view was that was the most important development that happened for him at Purdue, is that they got his conditioning to a point that he could play 30 plus minutes.
yeah, exactly.
Very hard for a human being that size to do that. Mara faces that same challenge. He's been far less successful navigating it thus far. I mentioned that there's been word over the offseason that Michigan plans to try to play all three of these guys we've just mentioned together. I think it could be one of the best rim protection groups we've seen in a long time. But I don't like the totality of what that would look like if I were a Michigan fan. I would be very skeptical of that. I think the better way to utilize Mara, unless he's really made huge strides in the areas of strength and conditioning, is he's your backup. Maybe you play Johnson about 25 at the five, and you play Mara 15, something like that. I think you get much beyond 15, 16 minutes a night, it starts to get more questionable with him again, unless he proves otherwise.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the questions with transfer players too, because I'm going to guess he left at UCLA as a reserve, that he didn't go to Michigan to be a reserve as well. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't end up playing reserve this season, but you wonder about how happy people are in certain roles.
Yeah,
We saw
that
Trey
too.
Helman left Michigan State in order to become a starting point guard. Almost, I mean, that seems like that was clearly the reason.
Yep.
And if he goes and he doesn't start, how happy is he going to be at the new
Yeah,
location if
you're
he's not
right.
the starter,
You're
right?
right. And that all remains, both ways with Mara and Johnson. Can they find and this is another thing we haven't seen yet from Dusty May, you know, can he navigate a roster like that. He
Right,
didn't have those
exactly.
problems at FAU because he didn't have, he didn't have the same kind of rosters. But can he manage to find ways to keep guys happy and on task and locked in? We could talk about Trey Holloman, and obviously you're right in terms of the reasons that he left and what he was looking for. But we also know that Trey Holloman was locked in last season. I never
Yeah.
questioned Trey Holloman's effort, his attention to detail, that he was trying. He never expressed unhappiness during the regular season, at least in a public fashion. And I doubt that there was much of it behind the scenes either, because that team truly was harmonious.
Yeah.
We know this was in the back of his mind, but yet they were able to still get him where he needed to be. Can someone like Dusty May do that? We'll see.
Yeah. And then we have Elliot Cadeau, 6'1" junior transfer from North Carolina. He averaged 9.4 points a game, 6.2 assists per game, shot 45, 34, and 67. Had 3.1 turnovers a game, so it's a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. So he is the point guard that Michigan has not had for quite a while, at least by all indications. But as you kind of alluded to earlier, there's also this thought that Yaxel Lendenborg is going to be, is he playing a point forward, point wing, a position two?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, this is again an interesting thing about this roster composition. I'll give Dusty May this. He didn't have a real point guard last year. He went out and found one in Cadeau. Now, Cadeau is not a perfect player. He's the 34% from three is I don't think he's actually that good a shooter.
Uh-huh.
And so he's not Donaldson. So you can't use him as a spot up shooter the way Donaldson was. Uh, and if you're going to make him the lead guy with the ball, okay, he's proven he can do that. But that taking things away from Lendenborg's game? I don't know. Uh, so to me, the biggest question is how much the pieces fit together as much as anything else. Cadeau has played starting point guard for. They weren't an elite. Well, his freshman year they were pretty close to elite. They were very good.
Yeah.
Last year they weren't very good. But he's played big roles for a big time program. So nothing that he sees this year is going to be new in that sense. You got a guy with experience. You got a guy who's done it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But UNC fans didn't seem to be very disappointed to see him go.
Yeah.
And I have seen rumors, I've seen suggestions that he's not at least at Carolina, he didn't necessarily have a reputation of being the greatest teammate. And there are also some questions about family members and, those kinds of issues. Not, having issues with coaches and all that kind of stuff. So that may all be much ado about nothing. We'll see. But I don't question the intent. I think they got a guy who, at least on paper, would seem to address a big weakness of last year's team. And if you're looking to get better in the turnover category, which they have to be, having a guy like Cadeau could be a major step in solving that. But again, I want to see how this team plays before I render a verdict as to whether this is successful or not, because there are reasons to wonder. There are questions.
Well, one thing you won't have any question about is whether the Brothers Adjusted Gutters can do great work on your gutters. If you need those leaves removed, if you need leaf guards put on, if you want some heaters put on so that you don't have icicles build up on your gutters, contact the brothers today. Have them get that work done before winter, and actually they can clean out the leaves so you can do something fun in the fall, like basically anything else, and you can stay off those ladders. Contact them. You get 10% off as a listener to the show. Just mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can contact either Greg or Kurt, depending what side of the state you live on. They will take care of those gutters, whether it just needs to be cleaned out, replaced, repaired, whatever it might be. They can do the job. They've taken care of Rod. They've taken care of me, and they do fantastic work. Actually took care of my wife's office as well. If it's a big job, a small job, they can do whatever needs to be done. So contact them today. You'll be glad you did. That brings us to high school recruit Trey McKinney. He's a McDonald's All-American, Mr. Basketball in Michigan, 6'4" power guard. And this is one I guess was Michigan State involved in this recruitment or not really that much because it was pretty clear he was going to end up at Michigan.
Very involved. Tom
Okay.
Izzo really wanted Trey McKinney,
Okay.
and there was never a great shot because Trey McKinney's dad,
Oh, that's right. His
unfortunately,
dad. Yeah.
is one of
Right.
those misguided souls who, um, is a Michigan fan.
Yeah.
And MSU, as has happened occasionally over the years, there have been a few of these, not a ton, but a few of them where, Izzo just when he's it's interesting because it's not just driven by talent. You know, there was another kid in the in-state class, although he moved out of state for his last 2 years of high school, Darius Acuff, who we're going to see what Arkansas comes into the Breslin this year.
Right.
A better prospect than Trey McKinney. Um, and MSU did not go hard after Darius Acuff, despite the fact that he's a tremendously talented kid. They went hard at Trey McKinney. And I think it was because Izzo got the vibes that he wanted from the kid to suggest he should continue to recruit him. And he loved the way he played and thought
Hmm.
that he would be a good fit here, which is all true. But that was an uphill battle. One they probably in the end you look back at and say there was never really a chance, but he'll still do that if it's the right kid. Trey McKinney is an interesting player because he's got all the accolades you want. He's a state champion as a junior at Orchard Lake St. Mary. He's a McDonald's All American, but I don't. I think he's fortunate. It's a good thing that they have Burnett and Roddy Gale because that means I don't think that Trey McKinney will start, and I think that's good for him
Uh-huh.
because despite the accolades, I think he's how can I put this? When people think of like a top 25 player, they usually have a picture in mind in a general sense. Often it's that a guy's going to come in and be immediately an impactful scorer, right?
Yeah.
I
Like
don't
Booker.
think Trey McKinney's that player.
Yeah.
I think the reason that I actually think of him, and they're not the exact same player to be sure, but this is gives you a rough idea of what I think. I think he's closer to somebody like Ty Rogers. I think he's tough. He's strong. He cares about playing defense and he's capable of doing that. I think he's potentially a really, really good glue guy who can make a lot of winning plays to help you. I do not think, at least not early in his career, I'm going to be shocked if he's a big time scorer.
Yeah.
I just don't see it. And there are people who will tell you I'm dead wrong about that. We'll see. I just don't see it. I watched him fairly extensively in AAU and high school. I never saw what I think of as a great offensive player. Now he is a guy, if he's smart enough to run the course and stay 3 years, 4 years, I could see him maybe later in his career developing into more of a scorer. I think that could happen. That's where he differs from Ty Rogers. I actually think he's got more offensive game than Ty Rogers had. But I don't see immediately like this is a guy who comes in. He's not Jace Richardson.
Right.
He's not going to be that. I will be floored if he has that kind of year. I just don't see it. I think if he's focused and Michigan's staff uses him the way I think he should be used, which is a guy who comes off the bench, he gives you energy, gives you toughness, he gives you defense. He can hit a shot now and then, but he's not going to be a guy you're going to look to be option one, option two, or even option three offensively, then it could work out very well. But you gotta keep expectations grounded. That's how I see it. I could end up being wrong, but I would be surprised if I am.
And the next freshman recruit we have is Winters Grady, 6'7" wing. He was a top 100 recruit, kind of the lower end, and seen as a shooter.
Yeah, and that's the thing that they think in time he could maybe be more of a three level scorer, but for now, I think spot up shooting is where you look to him for what you look for him to do to bring to the table. And I think what kind of role he plays probably gets determined by how well he holds up in other areas. Can he rebound a bit? Can he defend? If he could do those things, you could see some kind of role off the bench, probably fairly limited, but something. But he's got to be able to. I think it's going to be determined by how weak are the weaknesses.
Right, right. And then we have Ricky LeBird, who's a 6'6" freshman wing from Florida. I wonder if this is on some level is still. I imagine Dusty may have some contacts and connections in Florida
Yes,
for
I'm
recruiting.
sure. I'm
He was
sure.
originally committed to Coastal Carolina. Obviously, turned it down with an opportunity to go to Michigan, which is his only high major offer.
And he's a long 6'6", a good wingspan. They think he could develop into something down the line. But if you read commentary from Dusty May after they got him, it looks pretty certain that this is going to be a developmental year for him. I don't think they're expecting instant contributions, but they like the physical tools and they'll see where it goes.
And finally, we have Malik Cordell, 7'2", 255-pounder out of Germany.
Yeah, raw, definitely a needed development. I think you look at this, it's a good thing from a practice point of view. You got another big body you could throw in there.
Right.
Beyond that, this is a lottery ticket. Unlike some European editions we've talked about where their teams are counting on them to make immediate impacts, it's not the case here. This is a guy Michigan brought in to develop and see what they can get out of him over time. And then in the meantime, they've got a big practice body, which is not nothing.
All right. So that brings us to the overall feel for Michigan. Um, this is a team that looks on paper to be as good or better than last year's team. Obviously, a lot of hype just because it's Michigan. They tend to get a little bit more hype, just especially we feel maybe more in the state than other places. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I guess what are your final thoughts on this team?
Well, there's clearly a lot of talent here. And this is a team with, again, a lot of experience. There are a lot of guys, their third year, their fourth year in high major basketball. That's helpful. I look at the starting lineup that I expect to see. You got two fifth-year seniors, a regular senior, a
Right.
junior, and a sophomore. Pretty good. Pretty good level of experience. I also think they have the makings of some depth. You know, I'm saying, pump the brakes on guys like Trey McKinney and LJ Kason, but those are pretty good caliber players, pretty high caliber players to have as your reserve options. Like there's reason to be optimistic that those guys could prove to be good in a role, you know? And we talked about what's on the front line. Shetter has issues, but he's also played some winning basketball. So to have that guy as your fourth big man, probably, in my opinion, at least Mara as the other backup, that's pretty good. So there's a lot to like on paper with this team. There's no getting around that. Um, my hesitation, and these aren't huge relatively speaking, because when I'm talking about a team that I'm picking third in the Big Ten, that could easily be a top 10 team, you know? So I'm not saying, oh, Michigan might not make the tournament. These are relative considerations. It's two main areas. It's roster fit and deep shooting. And that's really the same problems that they had a year ago, right?
Right.
I wonder about the playmaking because Cadeau only makes a lot of sense to me if you're planning on him being the primary floor leader. If he's not, I don't think he gives you enough of the other things like Donaldson did, for example, that make him a great choice to play heavy minutes. Like you bring him in to put the ball in his hands, right? That's how I would see it.
Right.
Uh, but can you do that with Lendenborg on the floor? Does that work? Um, can all of this improve this team in terms of its decision making, which was a huge negative last year? Can they be better on the defensive glass? Also a major problem last year. Basically, can this team, as constructed, um, solve the negative issues they had a year ago? I think there's potential for the answer to that to be yes, but we got to actually see it. Um, so overall, And then the deep shooting, of course, you're just, can Gale find more consistency?
Right, right.
Is Burnett the same guy he was a year ago? Is Lendenborg able to shoot up to the levels he did a year ago? And can some guys off the bench step up? That again, that may be where Winters Grady can carve out a little bit of a role for himself. If he can come in and be a plus shooter, that might mean he actually plays. Uh, can Shetter give them something there, that's meaningful without giving away the house in other areas? So those are the main issues. But look, I think this is going to be a good team. There's no getting around that. I know with Michigan, admittedly, I will have more of a tendency to be critical, but I think fairly. I don't think anything I've said is amplified or hyped up. I think they're all real concerns, but on balance, uh, it's possible they could win the league. It's possible they could reach a Final Four. I mean, the talent level is probably good enough for that. I'm just a tick down from that level of expectation because I'm not convinced yet that all the things that prevented them from being that level of team last year have been fixed. Some of them
Right.
maybe, maybe not all. And even if they did address all those things, have they maybe gone backward in some other areas because of fit? I just don't know.
Well,
So
certainly one of the. Oh, go ahead.
good team, potentially a very good team, but as with pretty much everybody, you gotta these days you gotta see what you've actually got when the games are being played.
Yeah, and I was going to say certainly the resource that Michigan has are much more than they've had in the past, especially this last year when they go to the NIL with the Ellison infusion of money. I guess, and I don't really know. I don't follow Michigan closely enough to have an idea sort of what the NIL situation is, but I feel like it's kind of one person. Is that
That's
is that,
correct. That's
and
correct.
so it seems tenuous to me. Like if you have
Oh,
one, it can be
absolutely.
fickle, right? And
On two levels. On two
I
levels.
just I just don't know how sustainable that. I mean, I guess it's sustainable as long as the guy's alive and as long as he continues to give
Well,
you
it's
money.
not
But
him. It's not him.
well,
It's
I
his
don't
much
realize this is his
younger
wife.
wife.
I
Right.
understand that, yes,
Yeah.
but it's all Anyway, I just it
Well, that's the
when you have
point.
one
What
person.
if what if there's a divorce?
Well, right,
Maybe
yeah,
maybe she takes her half, and who knows? But
yeah,
yeah, you're right. It's when it's one person godfathering it. It's same thing, kind of a similar thing to what we talked about when we were discussing Oregon, right? What
right, yeah.
happens to
Built
Oregon
with Phil
sports
Knight.
when Phil Knight goes?
Yeah,
That's an open question. You know, Michigan historically has not been an athletic program that has supported basketball at the level of some of the best teams in the league. They used to engage, of course, in the street agent, slush fund, bagman world. But that's a different thing. That wasn't institutional level support. Um, we also may be entering a world, it remains to be seen, but over the next, not the short term, but say over the medium term, where NIL ceases to be as important or as open as it's been. We
right.
have to see what structures emerge. There's nothing that says the current state of affairs is the way it's going to be indefinitely. In fact, I don't believe that to be the case. So the impact of this financial boost may be short lived for reasons outside of Michigan's control.
Yeah, absolutely.
That remains to be seen. But yeah, in the meantime, this is a roster with a lot of potential. Wouldn't argue with that at all. I just to really buy into their Final Four good, their Big Ten title good. I've got to see how it all fits.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there with our discussion of Michigan. We'll talk plenty more Michigan throughout the season from time to time. Certainly when Michigan State plays them. Um, so we're gonna move on to our number two. Or sorry, we'll move on to the next team, which will be in the schedule. We'll obviously have Michigan State and Purdue is left. You'll find out in a little bit, I guess, once you get the next show drops and who Rod projects as the number one team in the Big Ten. So until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.